Good morning. We're going to call the Wednesday meeting of our February State Board of Education meeting to order. I would like to acknowledge that all members except Ben Jones are here. I assume he'll be coming in shortly. We have a lot of, there's Ben. Okay. Welcome, Ben. We would like to acknowledge we've got a number of Kelly folks here today. We appreciate you being here. There should be a lot of good discussion today for you to listen to. And I know we've got Craig Elliott and Mike Cole here. So if you would have your folks introduce yourself and have your folks introduce themselves and what district and what role they're in, that'd be great. We'd love to hear.
Just briefly, thanks so much for your support of the Kelly program that's out of KSDE. This is my fourth year as a mentor for superintendent and assistant superintendents. And the feedback that we receive all the time is just that it's a very good program for them to help first year superintendents be successful for second year. With my folks, before they introduce themselves, there are two folks from that are actually second year Kelly mentees here, and they'll let you know that as well.
Okay, great. Tiffany, you're up.
Good morning. My name is Tiffany Irving. I serve as the Deputy Superintendent of Wichita Public Schools.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Angela Holloway Payne. I'm in my second year of superintendency at Stafford USD 349.
Good morning. Brian Gregory. I'm the Director of the Andover CAPS program.
Betsy McKinney. I am the Rookie Superintendent at Fairfield USD 310 in Western Rio County.
I'm Lori Ray. I'm the new superintendent at Parsons USD 503.
Good morning. I'm Milo Miller, superintendent at USD 255 in Coyote, Kansas.
Okay, and Mike? Yeah, come on, bring your folks up front so everybody can see. Yeah, that's right. We do.
Yeah.
We do.
Not you, but we want to see. Yeah, I know you want to see. You know, I was thinking. My name is Mike Hull. I'm retired superintendent from Sedgwick. Jim McNeese. I've known him for 50 years. Jim, believe that.
Who are you?
Yeah. Anyway, one of my folks is not here today. His name is Randy Hendrickson from Pretty Prairie. He's a second year person. Just want to thank you for the support you've always given us, and I'm always proud to bring my mentees here. They're so proud of their schools, and I'll let them tell you about their schools. And it's interesting, their enrollment categories of the four that I'm working with this year. So other than Randy, I will let the other guys introduce themselves.
Bryce Walks, first year superintendent at Fort Larned USD 495.
I'm Mark Clodfelter, the superintendent at USD 474 in Haviland.
And I'm Brian Rowley. I am the superintendent at USD 307 in El Saline.
We have one more. You can see how good a mentor I am. Buddy Atkins sitting in the back with the mics.
I'm Bud Hooper. I'm the superintendent at USD 300, Comanche County.
Okay, well, we're very pleased to have you all here today. We know even taking one day off of work is a challenge, but like I said earlier, we'll have a lot of really good discussion items today. It'd be good for you to hear what the conversation is, and we're really pleased you're here. And we're very pleased with the work that you're doing out in our schools with our children and our teachers and our families. So thanks for coming and joining us today. Okay, we'll move on to the agenda, board members. Are there any additions or changes to today's agenda? Okay, if not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda for today. Janet Waugh, second Ben Jones. All in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstain. Okay, so 901. Thank you. Okay. Our first item today, and I know this is an item that the board members are going to be very interested in. We're going to have a discussion on school bus stop arm violations. That actually has had information that's had a lot of information. I know there's been some reports just recently in Wichita on the news. So Keith Dreiling is up, and you're going to lead us in this discussion. And I think there was a PowerPoint up there, so hopefully it'll be up.
No PowerPoint.
No PowerPoint. Okay. All right. Well, great. We'll let you have at it today then. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Keith Dreiling. I'm the State Director for the School Bus Safety Unit here at Department of Ed. You should have handouts in your folders. The first one I want to bring your attention to is the Kansas 30-day passing survey. This survey was done last winter, or from January 23rd, 2017 through March 3rd of 2017, and we had 57 districts that participated in the 30-day survey. During that 30 days, the 57 districts reported almost 10,000 violations of motorists passing a stopped school bus. Now, I would like to point out that over 6,800 of those did happen in the Wichita area, and the rest of them were across the state. And if you page through the report, you can see the different areas of the state broke down. Those were broke down by troop locations for the Kansas Highway Patrol. And what prompted the 30-day survey was the one-day survey that Kansas has been involved with at the national level through the National Association of State Directors of People Transportation. And those figures are in the 30-day, plus they're also on the handout that I gave you. And as you can see, we've been involved with the one-day passing survey since April of 2013. And last year, on a one-day count here in Kansas, we had over 1,000 school buses passed while they were stopped loading and unloading children. And this is just a one-day survey. And this is what we brought to the attention of the patrol back in 2016. And this is when they asked us to do a 30-day survey because they wanted to see a more accurate portrayal more than just a one-day count. But as you can see, last year we started collecting data on how many districts actually participated on the one-day count. In April of 2018, we had 214 districts that participated out of 286, which we were very pleased with the support we received from the school districts across the state. Kansas Department of Ed also completes a loading and unloading survey every year. They have for 47, 48 years, and those numbers are also in your handout. And we just took the last 10 years. And these are actual fatalities that resulted from a vehicle that passed a school bus. And based on our loading and unloading survey, we had a total of 88 fatalities in 10 years across the United States, and that includes the District of Columbia. And we also count the number of fatalities that maybe a student was hit by the bus, for whatever reason. And some of these instances, they're all over the map as far as what happens. But out of all the fatalities, 53.41% in the last 10 years from students loading and unloading the bus. When the bus was stopped with the lights on, 53.41% of those were killed by motorists passing the bus. If you've been following the news at all, since the school year started, we have approximately in Ohio, we had a 15-year-old killed in September. In Missouri, on the September 27th, we had an 8-year-old killed. And one that really had a lot of attention was Indiana on October 30th, where 3 siblings were killed at the bus stop waiting on the bus. And the bus had pulled up and a vehicle didn't stop and for the stop arm and killed 3 siblings, a 9-year-old and 2 6-year-old twins. And then also there was one in Mississippi on October 31st of this year. A 9-year-old was killed by a vehicle passing the bus. At this time, I'll entertain questions.
Now, this data, I mean, I know we had the 30-day survey that you brought us last year. I believe it was last year.
That is correct. August 2017 board meeting.
And then now this is just an update as far as the day one. It's sure not getting any better.
No, ma'am.
And it looks like in our information, there is a bill that's been maybe passed out of North Carolina.
Yes, we included a statute from North Carolina that talks about camera enforcement And right now, Kansas does have a law in the books that allows an officer, if he sees a violation, that he can cite a motorist. A lot of the states, there's 16 currently in the United States that have passed camera enforcement bills. These bills are based on a civil violation, much like what the Kansas Turnpike is doing to enforce their tolling. And what that allows the states to do is to install cameras on the bus. There are companies out there that will come in and install cameras on these buses basically for free. It's a turnkey operation. They come in, they install the cameras, they record the video violations and this type of thing, but it requires a law change to where camera enforcement can be done here in Kansas on school buses. These camera companies will come in and, like I say, install the equipment on the buses. They collect the data when they have a violation. It would require a law enforcement partnership to where when they do have a violation that the law enforcement looks at violations and either agrees or disagrees with the company and says, yes, this is a violation, no, it is not. Once the law enforcement says, yes, this is a violation, the data goes back to the company mails out a digital ticket to the owner of the vehicle, and then they collect the fines and this type of thing. Of course, since they're doing this all for free, the companies usually receive a portion of the fines for their time and trouble and equipment. And normally the remainder is divvied up between the law enforcement and then either the school district or the state or the county.
But this is an example of a bill that allows for
Yes, ma'am.
video.
Yes, ma'am. This is
enforcement.
one that when we talked to one of the camera companies, they recommended the North Carolina one, which was just recently passed. They said it was written very well.
We have questions from the board. Jim McNeese.
Thank you. This is really serious.
Yes, sir.
One student injured, and the fatality is just tragic. It's just and so preventable. You know, the data is lots of data. You know, that tells us that we need to do something. But I do have a question about additional data.
Yes, sir.
And you know, because I'm from the Wichita area. You
Yes,
know,
sir.
and I've also been in rural areas, but do we have the data on types of roads? You know, because there's residential, you know, there's roadways in the main roads, and then there's highways. You know, where are these happening? And do we have any data that tells us that?
We do have, it broke down by city, county, or state highways
But
on
not
the 30
by
day,
highways.
but on the 1 day count, we do not break
Okay.
it down.
Okay. You know, yeah, I have personally seen people, you know, who have just gone right by, you know, but I have also seen buses that have stopped and were late putting their lights on, you know, so, but I've also seen, you know, situations in residential areas where people have gotten frustrated and just taken off.
Yes, sir.
You know, there's different things. Not that any of those excuses in any way, you know, reduce the seriousness of this or that we're doing. But I know a lot of people they don't know that they're supposed to stop, especially on the highways. You
Yes,
know,
sir.
you know, when I say highways, I guess I'm talking about major arteries, you know, that connect residential areas. You know, I think there's a lack of awareness on a lot of people, and I've talked to friends of mine. They're confused. Do I have to stop when I'm on a highway? Do you have to stop whenever the lights are on?
Yes, sir.
You know,
It's
you pretty
bring up
easy.
An interesting point, yes, and we have provided educational materials. We have posters that we've mailed out
Sure.
to the schools and this type of thing and provided them. They're digital online. We've asked the schools to post them on their website. Our unit also does defensive driving, AAA, and I was just at a school last week teaching juniors and seniors defensive driving, and we have a little they call it Kahoot. It's a little interactive game where they watch and then they answer the questions on their phone. And we have one built on stop arm law, and it's really amazing that probably only half the students in the class actually get the questions right on when they have to stop and when they don't. Some of the experts that are involved with the camera enforcement say that once an individual gets a citation that was enforced by camera, they say that the odds are 90-some% they will never get another one. And what they say, what that tells them is that a lot of people do it because they don't think they're going to get caught. So that's another argument also.
In
addition
terms
to the
of
education.
promoting awareness, you know, and maybe you guys have an impact on this, but when you renew your license or when you're getting a license, you know, you have to take a written test. You know, is that, I can't remember. That's what I was asking. Is that in the test? You know, if the lights are on, flashing, you know,
It used to be, but I don't believe they give the written test anymore. They do on new licenses, but they do it on the renewals.
Right, not on renewals, but on new ones, you know, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's amazing how many people are just not paying attention or following the rules, or it's okay, I'm in a hurry, so I need to do this. You know?
And distracted driving
Yes.
is a big thing.
Yeah.
I mean, people texting on their phones and what have you.
Anything we can do, from the smallest to the largest,
Yes, sir.
to protect the kids, to protect the bus, you know, like that. That's we have to do.
Okay,
Thank
Ben.
you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You actually answered my first question right after I clicked the button. You know what? If we do cameras, how much will it cost district? I mean, we're not doing action items today. I'm aware of that, but so I'm glad to know that. But do you know if, like, this North Carolina law, which I'm going to assume we have to do legislatively to begin with, would that apply to private carriers, like contractors like Hutchinson privately?
Durham and First Student, yes,
Yeah.
it would.
Okay, they would be able to.
They would be available to do that.
Okay.
Also.
And then now from our end, what sort of public awareness, I know he talked about driver license renewals, but other PR, public relations reminders.
We have PSAs, public service announcements on our websites. And here again, you know, we tell the schools that if they have an in with the local TV station, the local movie theater where they show commercials, that these are available. And most of the states have PSAs. And the thing about it, these states will share. I mean, if they see one that Montana is doing they like, I mean, I've got contacts in pretty much all the 50 states. And I mean, the states are real willing to share whatever they have because we all are, it's a concerted effort. That this is something that needs to be addressed. And also the national organizations are also addressing it with the federal government, looking for campaigns such as Click It or Ticket or this type thing. And those discussions are still ongoing.
Jim Porter.
Thank you. This is such a critical issue. I've had a brief visit with the chairman of the House Transportation Committee. He's aware of this information, and I think this would be an excellent opportunity for us to partner with the legislature to address these issues. And my question is, how do we do that?
Well, sir,
I mean, are there places other than North Carolina?
I know that the camera companies would be more than happy to come out and visit with anybody and, you know, give us their experience with dealing with the various states. I know they work very closely with the states when they're asked to consult and everything on the laws and all that to help the states find something that's workable for them.
Well, and my point is that this is a good place for us to be, since it's safety of children involved. It just floors me that on a 30-day, that there are 222 passes on the right. Now, I live in the country, and to do that, you got to drive in the ditch.
Yes, sir, or on the shoulder.
And that is just incredible to me. And it seems to me like this is just a natural place that if we are obsessed with school safety, as we should be, that it gives us the opportunity to have a positive relationship with the legislature and work together to solve this problem. Only I don't know how to do it. We have to depend on people like you to tell us how to do that.
I would be willing to help in any way that we can. My staff, my partner, Assistant Director Dennis Tate, both and I are retired troopers. I have 28 years, Dennis had 29. So we've got some experience on the law enforcement side. So we'd be more than happy to help in any way we can with the legislature.
Okay, well, thank you. I just think we should be vocal advocates for something.
Ann Mull.
Thank you. I was noticing hardly anybody in Shawnee County participated in the one-day survey, and that was out of 280 some districts. Do you have a list of those? The 30-day project was 57 districts.
57 districts.
Do you know what percent of students are represented in those 57? Were they 57 big districts or?
They were, it was basically we started off on the 30-day survey asking for volunteers.
Uh-huh.
And then when we had enough volunteers in a certain area of the state, we just used the volunteers. The states, in other areas of the state where we did not have enough volunteers, we reached out and asked for more volunteers and this type of thing, and basically, made direct calls and said, hey, we need somebody in your area to participate and this type of thing. So we've got a wide range of different sized districts. I don't have the data as far as the number of students.
Could we get a copy of the list?
Pardon?
Could we get the list of the 50 some?
On the
Well, that's
on the 30-day survey, it
Oh,
does
it's in
have
there?
the-
I missed that
Of
then.
all the participating districts.
Okay.
And the ones that participated in the 1 day in 2017 are listed along with the participants. in the
When will you
30.
do a 1 day again? Do you know?
We will do the 1 day again here in April of this year.
And do you already have your volunteers for that?
Pardon?
Do you already have your list of volunteers for that?
We have the list of districts that participated last year. I don't have that data with me, but I mean, that is available, that I could provide that.
Because when you're missing Kansas City, Kansas, and Topeka, you're missing a big chunk of kids and buses. So, and even Shawnee Heights didn't do it, and they bus every kid. So, I'd like to see them participate.
Well, and it's a volunteer thing.
Okay.
And we can't mandate it.
And they would contact you if
Yes,
they want
just
to
have them
participate?
contact me. I'd be more than
Okay.
happy to help them out.
Thank you.
You bet.
Michelle?
I have a 15-year-old son who just completed his restrictive driver's license, and they spent about 2 hours or more on trains during their class. They did videos for an hour on trains and train safety. Maybe that's something that, I mean, he came out of there knowing everything about what to do when you come to a railroad track. Maybe that's something that they need to do at the when they're getting the restrictive, is to go over that. But I did notice I have a 7th grader and a 9th grader. My 7th grader in the morning and my 9th grader, see them get on the bus. They do not cross that road. So they're learning it somewhere. They do not cross that road until those red lights come off. They're yellow first and then they go to red. I noticed my youngest son and my older, they will not cross that road until that red light comes out, and they're looking both ways. Now, as in the morning and afternoon, a 3rd grader gets on, that bus comes all the way and angles so no one can come from either way, so that she can safely get on that bus, because they're younger, and the younger ones tend to just dart and go, or the little bit older ones, I noticed, tend to wait. So I'm not sure if they're supposed to be doing that or not, but I've noticed that for safety reasons, he pulls or she pulls at an angle so that the cars can't come from either way until that child is safely on that bus. I'm not sure.
We normally discourage them doing that because the bus would be pulling left of center, and if something were to happen, they'd be struck. What we tell the schools is that school bus is a traffic control device. It's the only vehicle of its kind that is a traffic control device. And most of the districts are pretty good about trying to make sure all the pickups are on the right side. And if students do have to cross from the opposite curb or whatever, the bus driver is required to have a signal for those kids before they cross. In other words, the driver would pull up, make sure that the traffic is clear, put his stop arm out, and then look over at the kids. And sometimes they have a hand motion or a thumbs up or whatever it may be, but they're required by state reg to have some type of signal for those students to cross over. But like I say, most of the districts do try to make most of their pickups on the right side so that the door is next to the curb. And here again, like say the right side passes and all that, we tell the schools to make sure that they have a policy in place with their kids that they don't come running up to the door when the bus stops, because vehicles do pass on the shoulders and this type of thing and on the right side.
Because I don't know if that's an agreement with why they've done it all year, why they do that at an angle for the younger ones, and then the children that are older do it the correct way, but they always wait until those traffic lights come out. So I don't, maybe spend a little bit more time on bus safety or equal amount with trains and bus safety, because it seems to be that's where I don't know what the rates are of people crossing the railroad tracks when the lights are flashing or down, but that would just be something I would just be concerned with on the statistics on that, since they spend so much time on trains, literally 2 hours on trains in those classes. So something to think about, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
We do have training available. I mean, we have Buster the Bus, is we still do some of those programs with the kids, the younger ones especially, yeah.
Jean?
Thank you. This is a pretty significant issue, but I was wondering if you had any data available from any other locations that have used this video enforcement to see how effective it is, so that we could kind of tell prospectively this is likely to reduce violations by whatever percentage.
Okay. I don't have that data, but I'm sure the camera companies would be happy to provide that type of data for you.
Okay, thank you.
Janet?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this. This is the first time I heard about the cameras. This is an excellent thought. I guess my thought regarding this is something we need to pursue. I think we need to move forward with it. I'd like to see a full study done on what the options are. I mean, the camera certainly sounds like the best one, but there may be others. I don't know. And I don't know whether we should, we have an opportunity this year, or we have to wait till next year, but I think we need to, I think it's a legislative matter. It's certainly not, I think this is above our pay grade, but I think we need to pursue this. And if we can pursue it, so I guess I just want to drop, I don't want to drop it. I would like us to continue this discussion, and I don't know whether this year or it'll have to be next year, but that's my thought. Thank you. Steve?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I drive for a living. I'm an Uber and Lyft driver, and I'm also licensed to drive a school bus.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
In 2016, I answered a call. I heard it on the radio. There was a great shortage in the Shawnee Mission district for bus drivers. So I drove like 20 years ago when I was first married, and then I thought I'll give it a go. And the training was so much different. 20 years ago, when I was trained to drive a school bus, I watched 3 15-minute videos and went out on a check ride. And that was how I was trained 20 years ago. My training in 2016 was about a month long. I don't know how many hours, but it's changed so much in terms of the red button in the back that you have to push now, because you have to push a button in the back of the bus to confirm that you've checked for kids sleeping on the bus.
Yes, sir.
Of course, we didn't do that 20 years ago. What I would, I think we should pursue this as well. I like the camera idea, but I just want to plant the seed that these things are changing very dynamically. We're probably going to have autonomous vehicles. I think the general consensus is within the next 10 to 20 years. There are people who are suggesting that their grandchildren may never learn to drive a car, may never have a driver's license. 5G is coming. We're going to have autonomous vehicles. We're going to have self-driving cars, self-driving buses. We already have some self-driving semis on the road, believe it or not.
Sir.
So if we have the attitude that we're in a very dynamic environment and we're not trying to etch things in stone, that we're going to be very fluid, that we're going to have solutions that may very well change in the next few years, I think that would be a very good thing to keep in mind. And we can pass rules. The legislative process, I guess, is what I'm concerned about. It's very slow. You know, it's hard to change things in state capitals. And because the technology is changing so quickly, I would just advise my colleagues to be aware of how fast things are changing. And it's quite possible that we will have self-driving school buses.
That is a possibility.
In 10 or 20 years, and then we'll probably have a monitor there to keep the peace and take care of kids who are sick and, you know, answer questions and be kind of a safety monitor. But the actual driving will be done by satellite technology. And so the solutions that we want to put in to keep our kids safe will also employ this technology. And what we want to do today will be very different 2 years from now, which will be very different from 5 years from now. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Commissioner, with the conversation. I think you've definitely heard a consensus at the board that they're very interested in this topic. So I think we'd probably be interested in what kind of a plan the department could come up with, working obviously with our department, but with the highway patrol, with the legislature, school districts. Maybe that would include some kind of a emphasis on public service announcements, those kinds of things. So if you could give us some ideas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for all the information and again presenting to the board.
Yes, sir.
I think we can get Keith and Dennis along with a combination of people, Highway Patrol, some legislators that I know are interested in this. Also, school districts, probably, I don't know, transportation department, revenue even. There's lots of people that have their hands in some part of this. And then start to put together a comprehensive plan that maybe could be presented to you as a plan later on that could go to the legislature in the next legislative session, including information that Jim asked for in terms of, do we know the differences between a highway and city, and do cameras actually reduce the risk? I think Steve's comments are excellent that, things are changing rapidly, and even if it's automated transportation coming at you, and how does that work? I do know that, the Turnpikes instituted a lot of changes in the last year and a half, and a lot of that now is to keep your speed and keep going. And if you're confused and you just drive through and you shouldn't have driven through, you get the opportunity to have a ticket when you get home, right? Or not quite that fast, but it's, so I think that technology is there. So Keith, just thank you for all the information, your diligence on this. Dennis and Keith do an outstanding job of school bus safety. We're proud that we got them over from the Highway Patrol, and they just do an outstanding job on your behalf.
Yeah, thank you very much for the report. And obviously from the conversation of the board, you've heard the interest. And so we appreciate the direction that the commissioner is going to go. And we know legislatively things take a little time, but if we don't start moving, so to speak, start the bus rolling, we won't have something in place next year. And if we can work towards getting something in place ready for the legislature for next year, I think everybody up here would be pleased with that. So we look forward to, I'm sure, hearing from you again. So thank you very much, Keith.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, our next item, we're going to it's a receive item to receive proposed amendments to the ESI regulations. And I believe Laura is with us today. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Jurgensen. I am an assistant director on the Special Education and Title Services team here at KSDE. So you have a couple of items that I'm going to refer to as we talk today. So the first looks like this without my scratchy notes on it. It has some bold language at the top declaring the purpose of this document. This is a document that Jim Porter brought to you at your January meeting. And at the January meeting, Jim Porter talked about how he and Jim McNeese, at the direction of the Special Education Advisory Council, brought together a group of stakeholders to discuss some needed clarifications to the emergency safety intervention regulations. And so I put a copy of this at all of your seats this morning so that you could reference back to what was brought to you last month. And so Jim brought together this group of stakeholders, and it included representation, so the two of them, of course, three providers from our technical assistance system network who support our schools in carrying out these regulations and in preventing the need to use seclusion and restraint. And then it also included representation from the Disability Rights Center, the Kansas Association of Special Education Administrators, the Kansas Association of School Boards, the Kansas National Education Association, and United School Administrators. And so those stakeholders came together and they agreed on this document, that these were the clarifications that were needed. So then what was asked of KSDE staff after that was to bring proposed amendments to the regulations to all of you today as a receive item. And I'll talk you through those here in just a minute. So today we'll take a look at, and this is in the attachment to this board item. So this is in your board packet. We'll take a look at these draft amendments to the regulations.
It's page 85 in your online.
Thank you, Kathy. So I'll do that first, and then we'll talk a little bit about where this goes from here. Because of course we have many board members who have been through this process, but we have some newer board members as well. So if you put these two documents side by side, the intent was to take the document the stakeholders created and put it into amendments to the regulations. So if you look at paragraph A, the stakeholders wanted to see a definition regarding isolation. And so now if you look at your regulations, if you look down to subsection K, you will see a new definition of isolation. So underlined language means that would be a proposed addition. And I think that, yes, there's just one place in here over on the next page where you will see strike type, and that indicates a proposed deletion of language. So isolation would be defined in subsection K, and where we see isolated is in subsection R, paragraph 2, where the student is purposefully isolated from adults and peers. Then the intent is that subsection K would provide additional clarification to schools around, okay, what does it mean to be isolated? This is what the stakeholders intended for this to mean, is our hope. So, and then in paragraph A of the stakeholder document, you see some examples there of here's some examples of when seclusion could occur. So where those examples are located is over on the next page, page 86, if you're following along in your online board packet. And that would be in the regulation that the state board has regarding the standards of when emergency safety interventions can be used. And so if you look down to subsection D, paragraph 1, that's where those examples can be found. So then continuing on through our document, if we look at paragraph C, the stakeholders wanted a definition of enclosed area to make sure that school staff understood what is meant by that. So if you look back to page 85 of your board packet, in subsection H, you'll see the definition of enclosed area. And so enclosed area is found in the definition of seclusion in subsection R, paragraph 1, where it talks about the student being placed in an enclosed area by school personnel. The stakeholders wanted to provide some additional clarity around what does an enclosed area mean? And so you can see here that there's references to an enclosed area can be a space where there is a door, whether there is a door or not, whether the door is open or closed. So you see that the stakeholders are attempting to ensure that these definitions are broadly construed. The idea being that then provides the most rights and protections to parents as possible. And then continuing on down on your stakeholder document to paragraph D, the stakeholders created some clarifications around the phrase student reasonably believes. Now where that is referenced is if you go over to page 86 in your board packet, up at the very top of the page where you see paragraph 3, that's a continuation of the seclusion definition. And it's referencing that the third element you have to have for seclusion to have occurred is that the student be prevented from leaving or reasonably believes that the student will be prevented from leaving. So where the stakeholder language was included was down in the standards section in subsection D, paragraph 3, where the stakeholders are indicating, if a student is placed in an enclosed area, the presumption here is the student believes they cannot leave. And what the stakeholders discussed in regards to this was that just with the dynamics between staff and students, if students are placed in an area because of the dynamics of the school setting, a student likely does not feel that they can leave. School staff are authority figures. And so then you see down on page 86, within your board attachments, subsection D, paragraph 4, we altered that language just a little bit, rather than referring to seclusion room, referring to enclosed area, because now, of course, there's been a definition provided of that. So that is what we have for you today in terms of proposed amendments to the regulations. What will happen from here is that next month, I will come back again and you all will have an action item on this. And so what you would be acting on next month is to send these proposed amendments, or if between now and then, if you direct us to make changes to this, for sending on the proposed amendments to the Department of Administration and to the Attorney General's office, who have to review the proposed changes to your regulations. And so then that process, I shouldn't give a timeline, but that process takes a number of months once that's out of our hands. And then it will come back to us with any edits required by those two agencies. And then those would come back to you again. There would be a public hearing where you would take comment on the proposed amendments, and then you would vote on a final version. Prior to voting on a final version, the department would come and provide a response to each of the comments that were made. So thank you for letting me go through that explanation. I wanted to make sure everybody understood.
Yeah,
Any
thank you, Laura.
questions?
I think we do have some questions. Anne?
Thank you. And this is an area I know almost nothing about, but when I'm looking at the definition of enclosed, and it says whether it's temporary or permanent, where the door is open or closed, or even if it has a door, that's more clear definition of enclosed than what they had today. I mean, that didn't even sound
Yes.
enclosed. How is that enclosed if it doesn't even have a door, or the door could be open?
The response to that question is the experiences that we've had in people recording or in interpreting what an area is.
Uh-huh.
You know, and I just put it bluntly, to their advantage. You know, and using those areas so they didn't have to report that the student was indeed in an enclosed area.
So it doesn't have to be enclosed, is what you're saying?
The student, in some ways, that's correct. In terms of a traditional enclosed area, you know, you'd think it has to do with the interpretation and the reporting. So I put you in isolation. Is isolation only a part of what you believe it is, or is it what that student believes it is in that enclosed area?
Okay. And I had another question about if they put, I was visiting a school a while back, and they showed me a room where they put a little boy that just got violent. And at one time they had some furniture and stuff in there, but they took all of that out. Is there any rule about what can or cannot be in a room where there, I would assume that would be isolation?
So the standards for areas that are used as seclusion are found in, so if you look to your board packet and you look on page 86, the requirements that currently exist around what that area needs to be like are found in subsection D, paragraphs 4 and 5. And so when you're talking about furniture, what that makes me think of is down in paragraph 5, where it says, each room shall be free of any condition that could be a danger to the student. And I'm wondering if maybe that was the concern of staff.
Yeah, it used to be, I guess, kind of a chill out room, and they had bean bags and stuff in there. Kids could go chill out, but this kid wasn't capable of chilling out, so they took everything out, which makes sense, I guess, because he could have used anything to hurt himself.
Going back to your first concern, I could tell you a couple of the examples the stakeholders discussed when creating that language. A couple of examples they discussed was a room that perhaps, an enclosed area that perhaps did not have a door, but then staff stood in the doorway, essentially acting as the door. Another example they discussed is when a student is left in the learning environment, but staff use mats to surround the student, in part to protect the student's dignity, because the student is escalated.
Yeah.
And so that was when the stakeholders came up with the word temporary enclosure, indicating that mats would be a temporary enclosure. So what Jim is indicating is that there were specific examples stakeholders were concerned about, and that's why they created this language.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Other questions or comments for Laura? Jim?
I'd like to, Laura, thank you very much for the work you did and the report you gave, and to Scott and to the stakeholder group, and certainly to Jim Porter and the ESI task force. This has been a long journey, and a lot of good work has been done. A lot of people have committed themselves to this issue for the protection of our students and staff, in situations. So it's been a long journey, and the journey will continue. Like you said, this is be several months before we get to resolution on this side, and I would dare say I would anticipate that we'll continue to work this as we learn more things, as we become better at what we do. We'll be looking at it. In fact, I might even caution folks that there could be some wordsmithing in between now and when they receive it again, here or there. So it's a document that's under constant review, both in terms of how we want to do it better and how the field is implementing it. So it's a journey, and we've had a lot of good work to the Disability Rights Group and to other advocacy groups and other interested parties and to SEAC, and I want to thank them for all the work they've done and what they're doing right now and probably in the future. So good job. This is well done.
Okay, thank you. This will come back. Mr. Porter, comment?
A very wise attorney one time told me that words matter. I will not mention who that was, but she's standing in front of us. And there are, we've been through this, and there's some little picky things, and Jim referred to this, that there may be some wordsmithing done, and so we're going to have some suggestions, and we're going to want to get with you and Scott or whoever else, and so the likelihood, I don't see any substantive changes, but exact words are important, and I'm not a good wordsmith. I hate it, but I think to make sure that we clearly understand, we're trying to make it where kids are safe, and that we get accurate reports when seclusion actually happens, that we'll want to visit with you and perhaps have some suggestions for things to be considered. And so likelihood there'll be a few editing changes before it comes back next month.
Thank you. Laura, thank you, and thank you for your work. Thanks to the stakeholder group and for Jim working on this. One question I do have, because I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure. The department currently does training on ESI and how to correctly institute emergency safety interventions. And I assume that your training already reflects the best practices that this document will then also represent.
Yes, so the revised language is something that our team has been providing guidance around to schools, that this would be best practice, because following this results in greater communication with the parents. So in terms of that, this will not be a big change to the field from what we have already been telling them. Now, of course, as Jim presented last month, there is a hearing officer decision that is slightly different from these particular words. And so we always advise school districts of, here's what the hearing officer decision says, here's what the law says, here's what best practice is.
But you are currently training best practices.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And if I might interrupt just for a moment, I do want to do a shout out to TASN. They have done a great job of providing that training, and not just the training, but to superintendents and to administrators and teachers across our state who have implemented these regulations. It really, we mentioned this has been a long journey, but we have changed the culture, as I've mentioned so many times, in our schools. And it is a changing dynamic. Some are more in the change process and move forward, and some are still in the change process moving forward. But to TASN, who has been the leader in providing that technical support and training, they have done a great job, and we appreciate their efforts on this.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Okay, our next item, we are acting to receive a final report from the Legislative Task Force on Dyslexia. And I know Mr. Porter's going to the podium, and we'll have a few other members who will be joining as far as the report today on the dyslexia. So we have been looking forward to hearing what the report will be. And I also know, just so everybody, all the board members know and the folks listening, the task force will also present this afternoon to a joint committee of House and Senate Ed, and that will be at 1:30 in room 112 North. So if board members want to go or the public is interested, that is being done at this afternoon over in the Capitol. So, Mr. Porter.
And we're going to have to adjust our schedule a little bit because we're a little early and some of the people that are going to be presenting are not here yet, but some of them are. So we'll readjust our schedule. The Legislative Task Force for Dyslexia was proposed last year by the legislature, and there were 16 or 17 members that were prescripted in that. And so we met according to their plan, started in the summer, and have had several meetings. We were given 4 charges, and this is all on it starts on page 90 of your packet. And the charges were to recommend evidence-based reading practices to address dyslexia, characteristics of dyslexia. I'll say them all, then I'll come back. The second responsibility was to look at pre-service and in-service for both of those people entering the profession and those people that are already in the profession, how they can be trained to deal with students that have dyslexia or characteristics of dyslexia. Study and examine current state and federal laws so that we know what other people are doing across the state, and to identify reliable and valid screening and assessment issues. So the way the committee was put forth, we actually broke into 4 subcommittees. We had 4 charges and we broke into 4 subcommittees. The subcommittee on evidence-based practice was chaired by Representative Brenda Dietrich, who is not going to be, it's unlikely that she'll be able to be here today because of conflicts in a committee that she is active with right now as we speak in the House of Representatives. One on pre-service and in-service, that was chaired by David Herford. Dr. Herford is the chairman of the Department of Psychology at Pittsburgh State University and is a nationally known, he runs a reading program there and is a nationally known and respected expert in the field. He is supposed to be here, but I don't see him yet. So, study and examine state and federal laws. We put our lawyers in charge of that. Laura Jurgensen, who you've already heard from and getting ready to hear from again, was the person in charge of that. And then to identify reliable screening and evaluation assessments. That was chaired by Senator Bruce Givens, who I believe is in the room. But first of all, I would like we have several members, I believe, of the Dyslexia Task Force who happen to be here today. And I would like for them, if you're here and you were on the task force, would you please come forward and introduce yourself?
I think I'm it. Good morning. I'm Janine Phillips from Wichita, Kansas, Fundamental Learning Center, and I sat on the pre-service in-service committee. So happy to be here.
So you two get introduced later. At this time, I'm going to ask each of the subcommittee chairs as they come forward and talk about the work of their subcommittee and how they arrived at the recommendation. The first one will be Laura. They did not make recommendations, nor were they expected to. They just made sure we knew what was going other places. So Laura, if you'll come forward.
Hello again. I'm Laura Jurgensen. So Jim already said essentially everything I was going to say. which was that our very small subcommittee, where Jim put all of the ex officio members, the non-voting members, I thought that was a very interesting tactic. He put all of us on the committee to study statutes and regulations, both state and federal, that impact dyslexia. And so with the support of the great staff at the Legislative Research Department, we did a 50-state survey to see what other states were doing on this topic. And in terms of laws around dyslexia, there are many states that have statutes and regulations. So we had lots to look at, and we provided all of that early on to all of the other subcommittees. We were intending for them not to have to reinvent the wheel. If there was something good out there being done in another state that we could take, and then we could make it appropriate for Kansas, make sure it fits the needs of Kansas students, that was what we were hoping to provide. In terms of recommendations, our subcommittee made recommendations to the overall task force, but none that came to this report. Our first recommendation was something Jim referenced earlier, was that words are extremely important. And so we offered, if there's language you want to run by us, we are happy to do that. We encouraged the other subcommittees to be incredibly specific in their recommendations, because we knew that they would come back to you, that they would go to the legislature, and we wanted the intent of the task force to be very clear in its recommendations. Another thing our subcommittee recommended was that there be a mechanism for a group to reconvene and monitor the progress of these recommendations. It was really important to our chair, Jim Porter, that this not just be put on a shelf and that nothing ever happened with it. And so you'll see a recommendation in here that we've asked the legislature for this group to be able to come back together so that annually, so that this group can assess the progress being made around these recommendations. So that was the work of our subcommittee.
Senator Gibbons chaired the committee on screening and evaluation, and we'll ask him now to address the board. Introduce yourself to the board, please. In a minute or less.
Good morning. I'm Angie Schreiber, and I'm from Emporia, Kansas. Was represented as a member from a nonprofit center who provides teacher training and also tutoring for students who are dyslexic. And it was a privilege to sit on the board or on this task force. And we had a lot of discussion, and it was a lot of discussion. I also am a parent of a child who has dyslexia, and have been working with dyslexic students for over 25 years. So thank you for your service, and I'll let everybody continue with the discussion of the recommendations.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Bruce Givens. My real job, other than being a senator, is I've been a special education administrator since 1984. So I started teaching down the street here, and it's interesting that I come to you on a day you just talked about ESI. I remember first couple of weeks in teaching, intercom went off. It said, "Mr. Givens, would you report to room 312? And I looked at the one para I had, so why would they want me up there? And she said, they want your muscle, not your brains. But there was no training that I ever had to deal with the things that we now deal with routinely. And that was, so I was called to a lot of those kinds of meetings in classrooms throughout that building. This committee that I worked and chaired on, we looked at the screening and the identification. And as we looked at it, and our members in my committee looked at it, screening was not the problem. Identification is a problem, but screening is not the problem. But we recommend for all schools to do some specific screening. They can be done rather cheaply, or a school can buy pretty expensive screening tools that would be used with all kids. And that when I say screening, all kids would be administered a simple screening tool for dyslexia. That's step one. And after that, then the identification part is much harder. We have not prepared school psychologists and other providers in our state to identify dyslexia as a learning problem. We prepare our school psychologists in our state to identify learning disabilities, which dyslexia can often be a learning disability. However, it's not always. Some dyslexic learners are not significant enough to qualify as a learning disabled student. So therein lies some of our problem. We need to provide some new training to our school psychologists across our state. So that's part of our recommendation. So you have this part about screening, finding, and most of the time we can find struggling readers by using the state's MTSS, multi-tiered system of support, most of the time. But a screening instrument would be part of that as well. So that's where we focused on. You have the report. I'm not going to read those things, but we also need to, we need to fund schools so that they can do that. Many of us have school, and being a special ed administrator, we're going to have to retool our school psychologists on how to find children with dyslexia. Many of them are excited to do that. In where I work right now in Butler County, I have 13 school psychs. It's split down the middle. Some got half of them ready to go, half of them say, I don't know how. So that's part of our problem in our state, is the identification. And they have all been taught, incorrectly, I believe, that dyslexia is a medical diagnosis. It's a diagnosis. It's an identification issue, but it's not medical, even though it functions in the brain as a medical piece without question. So here is a guy that's been, almost all my career has been in education, and I learned an immense amount about dyslexia and the struggles that we have in our schools, and from parents and advocates that work with these. So you have a really good report for all of our schools to take steps in. Any questions?
I think unless they're specific to this topic, we'll go ahead and do the full report,
Okay.
and then we'll take questions.
As I said, David Herford is the chair of the Department of Psychology at Pittsburgh State University. He chaired the subcommittee on pre-service and in-service, and I'm glad to say he has arrived, and so we'll let him make that presentation now.
Thank you. Parking in Topeka is worse than it is on a university campus, so I sprinted the last quarter mile here. I'm really happy to be here today. Dyslexia is a very, very important topic. As you know, there are 44 states currently looking at or have passed some type of legislation to do something about, the issues that we see with dyslexia. Today, we see about 15 to 20% of our children have dyslexia. And further than that, we have roughly 33% not reading at the basic level, which is a rudimentary ability to read. So clearly, we've got a systems problem here, and that's why the Legislative Task Force on Dyslexia was created, to help kind of solve some of these issues. And there's a number of points that are going to be made in this regard. But our subcommittee, the one that I was the chair of, was specifically looking at what types of activities ought to be happening at the pre-service level, preparing individuals to become competent teachers who can teach not only reading, but reading to individuals who are struggling to read. And so we had a couple of recommendations in that regard. What we'd really like to do is have the educator preparation program standards modified to include the International Dyslexia Association's knowledge and practice standards of teaching of reading. And these particular standards provide all of the issues that are relevant to teaching reading, and particularly those who are struggling readers. So it'll not only talk about the science of reading in terms of what we know about reading in terms of what the scientists have discovered and shown us, but also the techniques that are relevant in terms of identifying, helping individuals become competent readers, and then what to do when they're struggling. So we think this is a really good way to help individuals become competent teachers, so when they get out in the schools, they're prepared to do that, because they're certainly going to face individuals who are struggling in their classroom. If it's at the national level, probably about a third of their students are going to have some difficulties learning to read. We also wanted to require that individuals who would be involved with any aspect of the reading process, classroom teachers, reading specialists, etc., pass a science of reading test that would look at the fundamentals that we know with regard to reading, what's important for them to understand before they become teachers. We've looked at a couple of them, but we want the Kansas State Board of Education to further take a look at that and determine not only what would be an appropriate test, but also what the cutoff score should be. And of course, in terms of legislators, we'd like them to help fund the training, because currently, the science of reading that we're speaking of today is not currently taught in many colleges of education across the country. And so to help those individuals who will need to retool and to retrain, we'd like the legislators to come up with some type of monetary backing so that, that can occur, because it's going to take some retraining in that regard. For professional learning, for those individuals who are currently teachers, and I do a lot of in-service training myself and talk to teachers and at conferences and other places, and teachers desperately desire this information. In fact, when I talk to individuals about what we know about how to help individuals who are struggling readers, one of the things they're irritated about is, why didn't we learn this information while we're in school? And so, this is what we're talking about with regard to the pre-service training aspect. But we also know that there's a number of teachers who are obviously deployed and being teachers at the present time who also desire this information. So we would like KSDE to require school system to provide some type of evidence-based and consistent professional development opportunities for those teachers, because they desire this as well. Secondly, we want to encourage colleges of education in Kansas to develop some course of study with specialization in dyslexia. Currently, if you look at textbooks and syllabi of courses within those colleges of education, typically don't see much stated about the science of reading or structured literacy, or even much mention of dyslexia, and that clearly needs to be changed. And the third thing is we'd like to provide we'd like to recommend that funding for school districts to train appropriate staff in dyslexia so that they're capable of doing these things. And that's essentially a summary of the subcommittee that looked at pre-service and in-service training.
Put some things in perspective to follow up on what Dr. Herford said, about teachers being ready and wanting and hungry for help. I'm going to talk about some research that I've done, which will drive him up a wall because it's not scientific. We've talked about different types of research. I've done this exhaustive study, and that I've asked every elementary teacher I've seen since this task force started, anywhere I see them, in the grocery store, or at church, or in meetings someplace, if you have 20 kids in your class, how many of them are struggling to read? And I'm always getting 5 or 6 About 25% is the consistent answer. Until I met with a group of regional K-TOY teachers and asked them the same question, and actually it was more like a third with that group. And then I asked them the second question, were you prepared to deal with that whenever you got out of school? And the answer is universally no. So if we have a quarter, I've heard on dyslexia, I've heard all the way from 3% to 20%, and it's probably higher than 3 and it's probably lower than 20. But let's put that in perspective. In Kansas, if it's just 3%, that's 15,000 kids. If it's 20%, that's 100,000 kids. There are 500,000 kids in Kansas. Is that right, Steve? So that's what it is. If we continue to do the same thing we're doing, we're going to get the same thing we got. I don't know whether I've explained, I know several of you I talked to you about this. I was one of those students. I remember what it's like to not be able to read. I remember coping or cheating to try to figure out, getting the person next to me in the reading circle to tell me what a word was, so when it got to be my turn, because you can predict those things, to know what they were. And I remember distinctly the first time I realized that my peers knew more than I did was when I could, in the first grade in a class of 35 without an aide, I remembered that when we got to 4-letter words that started with a W, they all looked like want to me, regardless of what they were. And at that point, I could not decode those words. And I remember that distinctly as a 6-year-old first grader. And I know what that feels like, and I know what that, I wasn't a part of this process because of that. It's just an incidental part of that. So I am very sympathetic to the fact that we have to do something different in order to do that. Now, Brenda cannot be here today, but she had the recommendation on the evidence-based. And you'll see it's on page 94, I believe, of their recommendations. Should require each accredited school district, and we said accredited because we accredit more than just public schools that are part of our process of that they should have literacy evidence-based approach to teaching literacy skills to all students and promote early intervention for students with characteristics of dyslexia, and should use the components of structured literacy checklist, which is also in your packet. That the department should create a dyslexia handbook and should identify a coordinator that can help school districts implement these programs. Let me give you a couple of examples of when we're talking about the desire for people to move forward. I believe that the train's already left the station. I believe that we're already doing more than we've ever done in dyslexia, and maybe we're just out of that station, but we have a long way to go to do that. But let me give you a couple of examples of what the people in the field, always before, so, this should be a special education issue. We already can take care of this through MTSS. Let me tell you about MTSS. MTSS is different across the state. We have a very good program through TASM, and they work with school districts to faithfully implement the multi-tiered system of support. They are at capacity, and they work with 47 school districts. But there are other people that are probably implementing MTSS effectively, and those that are doing something that they think is MTSS, and we discussed MTSS light or MTSS like. And even one of our people talked about MTSS fake. So just to say we want a structured system of support, we need to make sure that system of support actually addresses the need. Just because you're doing interventions, you have to do the right interventions, and to do the right interventions, you have to know what they say. Jack Fletcher, who's nationally recognized researcher in dyslexia was contracted to come to speak to administrators through USA Kansas. They were hoping to get about 30 people to their session. They cut it off at 95 and had a long waiting list. We took advantage of that, and while he was here, we had a meeting of the task force, and he met with us, and we sent him at that point, we had our preliminary recommendations, which are somewhat different from what you see here today, because this was a work in progress, and he helped us a great deal and made some suggestions about wording and helped us make that arrangement. Now that's kind of funny. He came from Houston because he's the expert from Houston. In Houston, it'd probably be David that went down because if you're a couple states away, you're more of an expert, right? But we have the same quality of research right here available to us. Cynthia Haddocky, who is a member of this department, has been doing workshops for kind of awareness workshops, and this has happened since we made our recommendations just in the month of December and January, and she has gone to every service center in the state. And just in those last 2 months, her introductory, she has seen 1,000 students and 1,000 teachers, and has already rescheduled several of those. So there is a huge interest in this process. We are not meeting the needs of students that are struggling readers. We're going to have to do something different. And will it be controversial? Will there be people that don't like this? Well, it's changed. So yes. We are making these recommendations to the State Board of Education because we believe we have the power to do that when it comes to program standards for colleges, when it comes to requiring things through our accreditation system. You've seen them all there. And then we're making recommendations, but we're not recommending any legislation except funding, which will have to go through the appropriation process. We'll be coming back. We're meeting with the legislature today. We're asking you today to receive the report. Now that means that you're not approving anything except you're receiving it. So that gives the commissioner the opportunity to start activating the people within the department to start looking at these recommendations and to do the things necessary to bring back to us the way to implement them. And then at that point, we make the final decisions. So you're not approving the report, you're receiving the report. That's a parliamentary issue. So to make sure that the board will hear about this many times before it's implemented. But I think, and Laura referred to this, one of the last things that we recommended is that so many times when there's a task force, a legislative task force, it is made, it is presented, it is bound, it is put on a shelf, and it gathers dust. We believe there needs to be an there's accountability process. And quite frankly, my colleagues, this is an accountability process for us because we're asking that the task force be reappointed and meet on an annual basis for the next 3 years so that we can look at these recommendations and make sure that they're being faithfully implemented. Now, I'll tell you what's going to happen if they're not. And that is there's going to be legislation that does not necessarily take in consideration all the things that we took in consideration. So we have, not only do we have the opportunity to take this ball and run with it, but if we also have the opportunity to be an example of effective leadership in an area that we identified as a problem. And I would encourage us to do that. There were several groups that were not represented. And you'll find out, Madam Chairman, that when you're sitting in that chair, I noticed that you don't have a lot of power. If you're a legislative chairman, you're a dictator. I kind of liked that because I couldn't do it here with you guys. So I added 6 people to the group. Now they couldn't vote, but there were people that were not represented. I asked somebody from the National Education Association. And fortunately, the person they appointed was a school psychologist with a great deal of knowledge, but represented KNEA. The colleges of education, the Regents universities appointed a reading specialist. The non-Regent universities appointed somebody. A person, an assistant superintendent who I had worked with before that has a great deal of knowledge of MTSS and has implemented and has children with dyslexia, was invited to participate, and then a retired director of special education that I worked with before and have a great deal of respect for, plus somebody else I've kind of forgotten right now because I didn't write that down, but there are 6 that were added to that. And they were not just people that came up and testified. They were people that we put at the table, and they were fully engaged in the conversation, and fully, even though they couldn't vote, they were fully engaged in the conversation, made multiple recommendations, and some of which were implemented. So now, as you are all, as I can look at you, when is he going to shut up? At this point, I'm going to, and Madam Chairman will respond to questions, and I'll tell you up front, my job was not to know anything about dyslexia. The experts are behind me, so I'll probably not respond to your questions, but we'll let the people that can do that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Porter, and thanks to your task force and your representatives today who presented. It's obviously you've done a lot of work. We do have a number of questions, so I'll just begin. Steve, you're up.
Jim, you can stay right there, if you would, please. The first question when I logged into the hand waving was actually a technical question related to my grandson who wrote letters backwards. He would write his letters in correct order, but the R would have its tail going lower left instead of lower right, that sort of thing. So my first question, very briefly, was, is that a form of dyslexia? I'm guessing it would come under the guise of
that's a David question.
All right. So this is, go ahead, because I've got another question for Jim.
It depends how old your grandson is when he was doing that. Okay. Because in the normal, typical development of reading and writing skills, individuals don't have a good sense of the relationship between the sounds of their language and the graphemes or letters or symbols that are used to represent them. And so anyone who's been a first grade teacher, they have interesting spellings and interesting ways to write words and letters until they become meaningful. And when they become meaningful, now we know that the letter B represents B, and the letter D represents D, and they stop essentially confusing them, although those are mirrored images of each other. Mm-hmm. So those are very huge challenges for individuals to differentiate.
And he was 6 or 7 in this phase.
Yeah, so that's not uncharacteristic of normal reading development. But what you'll find is individuals who are adults who do the same thing as first graders, that obviously there's a sign of some difficulty because they've never come to appreciate that intimacy between the sound of our language and the symbols used to represent them. And so one of the huge characteristics that we see of individuals is as they get older, those skills don't develop. And so we'll also see children, we know that spelling lags behind reading anyway. You know, like spelling is a more challenging task. It's challenging because it uses a different type of memory. It's called a recall memory, where you have to recall it yourself, where reading is a recognition, you're recognizing those things. But also it's a difficulty because, you know, as they're getting older, they're not developing those things because of those issues with dyslexia. But also we have a writing system that is incredibly difficult to learn how to read in. In fact, I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the English writing system, but it's called an opaque writing system because to get from the letters to the sounds is an opaque process. There are some writing systems we call transparent writing systems where the decoding process is so easy. And the children who have dyslexia in those writing systems, they struggle learning how to decode, but their decoding system is so easy that they eventually get there. And so when you look at the literature and dyslexia in those writing systems, like German is like that, Finnish, Italian, Spanish to some extent, what you'll find is they're very slow readers, not non-readers. But because of our very challenging writing system, in addition to having a neurological system that doesn't pair those things together very well, then you've got some pretty significant problems. And I just want to cram a lot of stuff in here for those of you who don't know a lot about this process, because it's really pivotal in terms of understanding why our children are failing in schools learning how to read, because that English writing system is so difficult. So in those transparent writing systems, they have a one-to-one correspondence between the letters and the sounds. So every letter represents just one sound, and one sound is only ever represented by one letter. So you can see that decoding, once they figure that out, they're off kind of running, although they're going to be slow readers, but not non-readers. Here, we don't have that one-to-one relationship between letters and sounds. So some sounds are represented by more than one letter. Some letters represent more than one sound. My favorite are the vowel sounds. We got 19 different vowel sounds in our language and only 5 vowel letters, 6 if you count Y. And then you look at different ways to spell them. There's 9 different ways to spell the long E sound, and it's true of all those vowels. So it's almost as if a few hundred years ago we thought, oh, it'd be a really great way so no one will learn how to read in this system.
My favorite is OMB. OMB, how would you say that? We'd say bomb, right? Unless it's like comb,
right,
or womb,
and that's precisely
bomb.
That's right. And so all those different ways to spell things makes it incredibly difficult for our kids. And not only do we have issues with the correspondence between letters and sounds, but some of the sounds we represent with 2 letters or digraphs. And my favorite is the SH sound, because we teach kids that the S is S and the H is H. So they think it's S, but it's sh, an entirely different phoneme. So it's just really, really, really challenging. The 5 major languages that actually contributed to English, we allowed them to retain their writing systems, some of which are also opaque. So when we tell kids things like, well, when you're looking at syllable types and you see a closed syllable, which is a syllable where a vowel sound is followed by a consonant, that's usually going to be a short vowel. And you get to Chevrolet and you're like, lay? How do you get lay out of LED? So it's just a challenge. And it's really important that we teach kids what we know about the science of reading, how to decode, how to correlate those sounds with the letters, etc. So spelling is always going to lag behind reading. It just is going to do that. We'll see 5th graders who they can read stuff they can't spell. As an adult, how do you spell accommodation? Is it 2 C's or 2 M's? Or
Respectfully, I think this is a good lead-in for my question to Jim, because now I've got one that sort of pertains more to a big picture sort of approach to things. I remember when Kathy said a few years ago that the teaching of reading is rocket science, and I bristled at that. But as time goes on, I realize there's something to that. Thank you very much. But I'm wondering, since we taught our children to read well at home, just very quickly, my daughter made her grandparents cry on her 4th birthday because they gave her a really ornate birthday card. And she read it as well as Connie Chung could have read it, or Diane Sawyer, and my parents just cried because my daughter was such a good reader. She had a little brother, and we thought he was just a little ball of dough. He'd never amount to the kind of reader that his older sister was, and turns out he was reading at a college level at age 8. So we figured out how to decode it for our own kids without really studying it as rocket science. Now, I had studied rocket science, maybe that pertains. Here's my question, Jim. Might we create an environment where we welcome those who just really want to participate in the education of our children, citizens, to help with reading time? Because some people just take to it, for however we want to say it. Some people just naturally take to it. But then when we have some folks who struggle, it seems to me that's where the experts and the science needs to come in. So if we did a better job of welcoming the public into our schools, maybe even give them a couple bucks to help out during reading time, maybe we could have a better educational product and service, instead of taking the approach that all teachers need to be trained in all of these aspects. it just seems to me that because some kids naturally take to it, that we should welcome the public to help us with this at a low cost and then reserve the high-priced folks who study the science and know how to decode problematic issues. Then we can pay them the big money to solve the big problems. Do you see an avenue where we might actually open the doors to the public?
The first issue, I want to acknowledge that Dr. Herford is a professor, and he actually answered your question in less than 50 minutes, you know, and that's what professors do. Thank you, Dave. I don't know the answer to your question, but I do know that every normal class has kids that struggle reading. And we look at the 5 pillars of reading, which are phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. But unless you can read the word, unless you can decode the words, the other don't matter. You can't comprehend if you can't decode the word. You can't, you're not fluent if you can't read the word, if you can't decode the word. None of those, that's the key. And if we have significant numbers of kids in every normal classroom who are struggling to do that, I think that it is important for the people that are dealing with them to have those skills. So, and the rest of it, that's a much larger question for another day.
Thank you. We do have a number of questions, so.
I can't believe that.
I know it. Okay, Ann?
Thank you. Jim, I found the report itself on the Legislative Research website. Is that the only place to find it, or is it posted other places so people could go see it if they want?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, because it's kind of, unless you know how to get to the research website, you're not going to find it. But if there's another place it'd be
If
posted.
it's on our materials, then that's accessible.
Yeah.
But that's
people
also somewhat
kind of buried
somewhat
in
obscure.
there. Okay. I noticed that the definition you guys were asking the legislature, whoever, to adopt included learning disability, that it is a learning disability. Does that have implications for getting more kids into IEPs or?
That is, our intention is to early intervention and you guys feel free to jump in. Our intention is for early intervention and early identification and early intervention, which would in theory reduce the number of children in special education.
I understand that's the goal, but when you define it as a learning disability, does that set us up for automatically getting them into special ed?
To answer your question, the statement in the report is a reflection of what is already in both state and federal law, that dyslexia is included in the definition of learning disability, both in the Kansas Act for Exceptional Children and in the IDEA. But it doesn't open the door necessarily, because to qualify for special education services is a 2-pronged test. First, does the child have a disability? And then because of that disability, does the child need special education and related services? So that's the second part of that has to be considered. There could be children who have an identification of dyslexia that do not need special education and related services because of that.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask a couple other quick ones? Thank you. Did you guys come up with
Depends on how long you want to go this morning.
Well, it could be a short answer. Depends on, the questions are easy. It's the answers that get long.
I've got to go across the street by 1:30.
Did you guys have an estimate of cost to give the legislature?
We did not.
No idea? Million, gabillion?
No idea. Well, we have some, Laura has done some estimation. I talked about ramping up MTSS. The department has done some estimating of that and has some.
Okay, because it'll be hard to talk to the legislature about funding it and have no idea what we're talking about.
We didn't have a way to research that.
The only other thing was in talking to people about the size of the problem. Numbers are all over the board. Did the task force come up with a range of kids with this problem that we can say this is what they think? Is it 3 to 20? Is that what you guys are using, or is there an official number from the group that we can talk
I've
about?
only heard 3 from one person, and that was one person that didn't like our report. Everything else I've heard range from about 7 to 15.
7 to 15.
But
is-
I don't know, David will know more than that than I will. Is that reasonable?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Jim?
We've already proven that they know the answers. Don't expect me to know anything.
Well, thank you for the report. It was actually it's going to sound weird maybe to people, but it was fun to read. You guys did a good job. Thank you very much. The first thing that came to my mind was how this report intersects with our vision for each child. That if we're going to make a difference in reading, it's not going to be the old, the kid's lazy, kid just doesn't work hard, doesn't want to learn how to read, the typical things. And thank you for elaborating on the spelling and all the suffering I went through. I kept saying, this is not right. The system's rigged against me. And it is, to a certain extent, as you indicated. And Jim, how are the colleges and education preparation programs responding to early parts of the report in terms of changing the experiences, learning experiences for potential teachers?
I've only heard from one group who are not excited.
Okay.
And let me elaborate. I met with the deans of the regents' deans, early on in this process, and I actually asked them to appoint somebody to be on one of those people on the task force. And I was told at that point, we'll teach what's in the standards. So if the standards reflect something, we have to do that. I'm going to go back to your vision. I'm going to follow up with that. And so then we were recommending that we put the structured literacy as a part of the education preparation standards. And then whenever I was contacted by the same group, they were objecting to that being in the standards and some other things like that. And, universities change slowly. And so that was, there's a dynamic process there that I don't understand. But now going back to the vision, Kansas leads the world in the success of each student. And we recognize that 25 to 33% of the kids that are in a normal classroom are struggling with reading. We can't achieve that goal unless we address that issue.
Amen.
And so that's the overriding, the vision is the overriding issue here. If we didn't know that before, we know it now. And since we know it now, we have to react. That's my unbiased opinion.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to just share an experience as a high school principal, which I've said before. I want to tell you that who was part of the early stages of testing and accountability processes. Every teacher is a reading teacher. Every teacher is a reading teacher. Now, do some need to know more than others? Yes. But in every curriculum area, every academic area, every non-academic area, reading is a part of that experience. And every teacher needs to know that it's not about lazy, it's not about stupid, it's not about, there are reasons why people behave and do the things they do and the success they have. Yes, some kids, Steve, their kids went out and they're reading college level by 8th grade. Oh man, how cool is that? Well, I got kids that can run faster than your kid. Sometimes we don't know why your kid can do that. Steve would like to take credit that he's the parent and they did some really cool things, but on the other hand, we go the other way. Kid can't read, it's the parent's fault. What'd you do wrong? That's the other side of your formula. And many times they're just as frustrated and at wit's end about why is this happening? Why is it happening to me? And here's something that I've heard from you today and read in the report that caught early, identified early, screened early, we can make a significant difference in the educational experience of that child, which is in so many ways a health issue, a social, emotional, issue. Because how many of the kids that we work with in high school, who are disruptive or have problems, they're related to their inability to connect in the classroom or inability to read, and have terrible grades. And then we say it's because they're bad kids and they had bad parents and they had bad this. And, the people who have good kids and can read well, we're patting ourselves on the back and saying, hey, it's your fault, buddy. We have to take responsibility as a board and a legislature, as a society, that we can do better by intervening earlier with specific strategies, related specifically to reading. We can do a whole lot of change in people's lives. So thank you for what you did. And the amount of money it's going to cost is the amount of money way less than what it's going to cost us to take care of them later. So this is vitally important. And thank you to the committee. Thank you for bringing that information out and bringing it to light. We can make a difference.
Ben?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I just want to say amen.
Sorry.
And that took less than 50 minutes.
First of all, thank you for your work. I had a parent at a luncheon I was at on Monday in my district that I was doing business, said we're going to receive the report on the dyslexia this week, and they had a child. They moved from a district, moved from one district to a school district in my area, and that parent was really, their child has dyslexia, and they were really excited to hear what you guys were presenting today. So I hope he's watching. I told him to watch, but who knows with that. But my question is, you tied this into the accreditation process. Could you explain the thought process behind tying it into KISA, as well as it said an external review team looking at the
the external review team is the
OVT.
Is the OVT.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was just, because the OVT wasn't explicitly listed in there in the report, so I was just making sure that was one and the same.
And to put it in the accreditation process so to make sure it gets done.
Okay.
Is that it? Is that okay?
Dina?
By the way, it's a whole lot more fun to be on that side of the table.
Yeah. Well, as a former legislator who served on the Education Committee for 16 years, and I think almost yearly, we saw this issue come before us. And each time, someone from the department assured us that the tool that they had developed would solve the problem. And I think it's clear to me today, as well as having served as a teacher for a number of years, also for 41 years, that no child learns the same way. And it's important that teachers have multiple tools in their toolbox so they can deal with lots of different issues with children so that we can make sure that every child is a success. And so I see this document as a big step forward that doesn't take away the responsibilities of the state board, and it places responsibility for the funding component in the legislature, because oftentimes when the legislature acts on something like this, they have one solution. And I think because kids are all different, it's going to take multiple solutions, and I think this document allows that to occur. Thank you for your hard work, and I look forward to seeing what comes of this in the future. It should be a living document and not be placed on a shelf like I know so many studies and task force reports have been gathering dust for a long time. This one, I hope, keeps moving on. Thank you again.
The people that were on the
And
task,
thank you, Madam Chair.
the people on the task force are very articulate and very committed. And I'm sure that if nothing happens, everybody will be hearing more and should.
Okay, again, thank you to the committee. Thank you to the presenters today. I do have a couple of questions as related to dyslexia, and we've heard some figures today, and I think Dr. Herford, you said kind of between 7 to 15% is kind of a research based. So when we go in or people go into the screening process, and I'm pretty sure I know this answer to this question is kind of a rhetorical question, but not every child who has reading difficulties is dyslexic. Would you agree? So therefore, we need a screening process, and we need a good screening process to help those children. Now, you mentioned because we are going today to be acting to receive the report, and then it will go to the commissioner and his department, and they will then bring various different things back to us. So what I am assuming, and let me just make some assumptions here, for instance, the action on the pre-service. So probably what would come back to us at some point in time would be a recommendation for program standard review as far as the structured literacy,
Yes.
the evidence-based practices, those types of things. Is that correct there?
That's correct. And I would assume, I would think that it needs to not be something that needs to start in the very near future.
Yes, agreed. And then as
Like
far
this afternoon.
maybe a little more breathing room than that, but yeah, very soon. And then the other question that I have, that the structured literacy piece, and again, that is an evidence-based approach to teaching literacy. What we're probably looking at there is within our own department is really some work on our standards, because that isn't a curriculum as some of our school districts, they adopt curriculum. We adopt standards.
Correct.
So the structured literacy component would more than likely become a part of the KSDE standards.
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. That's a couple clarifications I wanted to make sure. At this point, I would take a motion for the action. Yeah, Jim?
Madam Chair, I move that the Kansas State Board of Education act to receive the report on the legislative task force on dyslexia.
Okay, so we have a motion. We have a second. Jean Clifford. Any further discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 10 there, so no opposition. So 10-0. So again, thanks to all of you, thanks to the extended task force and all their work. I do believe this is just a beginning and not an end, but it is a good beginning. And again, you'll be over this afternoon at the joint meeting of our House and Senate Ed, and a number of us will be over there. So thank you once again, and I'm sure the board's ready for a much needed break, so we'll convene at 11 o'clock. Thank you. Well, welcome back. We are going to have a discussion on school and fire safety, and it looks like Dale's going to start us off this morning.
Madam Chairman, a school bus, safety arms and so forth. There was a bill introduced in 17. It passed the House. It got Senate, passed out of committee, and peacefully died. but there were some amendments to it, but that's the bill that was introduced in January 17. So I wanted you to have a copy of that because that was discussed. The other thing is, Doug Jorgensen is here today, State Fire Marshal. He's been super to cooperate with, and we've had hearings already on a proposal to change the number of drills and so forth that some of you have had a lot of calls on. And to my knowledge, we've talked to 2 superintendent groups and to the legislative committee, and all of them thought that the fire marshal's recommendations were good and supportive, and he's been very cooperative to work with us in that process. So we're real pleased that Doug Jorgensen's here, and he's going to enlighten you on numerous other things. Doug, it's yours, bud.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and welcome. We're glad to have you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the committee inviting me to come by this morning and just give you a little bit of update on how our office inspection process goes for the schools out there, because I'm sure that from time to time you get calls from superintendents and principals having concerns with sort of how we do things. Basically, just a brief overview of the statutes that I guess give us our authority to do those inspections. I won't spend a lot of time on them. I know that you all have printed copies in front of you, and let you read those as we go forward. But they entertain all basically K through 12, both public and private schools. We don't do anything in the college or university setting. And we don't do anything, as it says, with any vocational projects that might be on the school property. If the woodworking group or a group of students are building a home for, to sell or auction off, those type of things, we don't get involved in any of that. It's only actually the school buildings themselves. We inspect all the buildings once every year. In cities that are considered first or second class cities that have a full-time fire chief or a full-time fire inspector, they're required to do those, but there are instances where we are still doing those inspections simply because of budget cuts and limitations on funding for those local fire departments. So we still do a number of the school inspections, even in cities where they have a full-time fire chief or full-time fire inspector. We actually enter into agreements with about 90 fire departments around the state every year, and we have discussions with them, and we work out with them what inspections they're going to do that year for our office, which ones they're not, and then we know which ones we need to add to our schedules. And then once the inspection's done, if we find any violations or anything of concern, again, this is just part of the statute that allows us to have the governing body that has control over that building make those corrections and fix whatever needs to be done within reason. If there is an issue with that particular school district, with that particular actual building, say they might not have the funds available at that particular time to make those corrections or improvements. The KARs that we have give those principals / school districts the ability to request a variance. So they can request a variance in writing from our office, and we can look at that variance, and the state fire marshal can either approve or deny that. But past history-wise, if it's a good written justified variance request, more than likely our office will approve that, and we'll give them some time, even if it's a year or 2 years, depending on the seriousness of the violation, to take care of that, to fix it, or we'll help them put some other measures in place that can sort of take the place of whatever needs to be fixed until it can be fixed. So when I first took office about 8 years ago, we actually rescinded about
1,500 violations our office had issued just to schools because the agency was a little bit overzealous in what they were doing and were actually doing things, I think, in my opinion, outside the statute and the current regulations at that time. So again, we're much more open to working with the schools and helping them through those situations if we can. That's just a quick map of our fire prevention specialists. They're the ones that if you're doing a new building or you're doing an over 50% remodel of an existing building, you have to have plans submitted to our office from an architect. And then our protection specialists review those plans just to make sure that what's in those plans meet the current life safety rules and regulations. Once they do that initial code footprint review that we get again from a licensed architect or engineer, they'll review those. If they have any issues or concerns, they'll actually get back with that architect or engineer and they'll work through those with them. And I'm sure then those architects and engineers will let the school administrators for that district know what's going on and sort of where the process is. Those code footprints, again, need to be done on all new buildings. And we have sort of set a threshold of 50% on any remodeling projects. So if a building's being remodeled more than 50% of basically of its square footage, we're going to require a code footprint too. And that new remodeling will probably have to be done to the current rules and regulations that are in place. Because there actually is, and I'll get to it here in a little bit, there's actually a statute on the state books that, and part of the issue when I rescinded those 1,500 violations 7 or 8 years ago is that buildings, we had a lot of school buildings that were built back in the 40s and 50s, still in use. And our office was inspecting those and expecting those districts to bring those older buildings up to current code. And there's actually a statute that prohibits that. There's actually a statute that says that a building needs to be inspected based on the code that was in place when it was built, unless there's determined to be a distinct hazard. So a lot of those violations we rescinded were an attempt by our office at the time to bring those older buildings up to the current code, which was going to be very expensive for the districts out there. Visit a little bit with preparedness drills. That's a topic for everybody. That's the current KAR, and there actually also is a current statute that addresses it. But there was a bill introduced Friday in the Senate Education Committee, specifically pertaining to the preparedness drills. Because what happened was in our appropriations, our office appropriations bill last session, at the very end of the session, in the wee hours of one morning, when our appropriations bill was approved by the legislature, they added those 9 crisis drills. And so it wasn't actually done by bill and it wasn't done through a committee. It was done sort of at the last minute in our individual appropriations bill. And since it was done in our appropriations bill, those new drills are only in effect for this fiscal year. So if nothing's done this fiscal year, if it's not added again into our appropriations or a specific bill doesn't come out, we will revert back to the current statutes of the 1 fire drill a month, the 3 tornado drills, for a total of 15 drills. Or now with what came out in our appropriations bill, when they added the 9 crisis drills, they reduced the tornado and fire a little bit, but the school still ended up with like 16 drills within the school year. And when we sat down and actually looked at actual school days, that comes out to be about 1 drill every 11 days, something like that, which is probably a little bit over the top. So with the help of Mr. Dennis and the Safe and Secured School Group now that the Department of Education has, we've been working on that together. We actually have an advisory board We've been working not only on the school drill issue, but school safety and things. And we sort of came up with an idea on what would be more reasonable on those drills. I shared that with the State Fire Chiefs Association, the State Firefighters Association, and other people in the State Fire Service, and the majority of them were in agreement with that. So if you look at the Senate Bill's 128, but if you look at that bill, it reduces the current 15 drills and the new 16 drills down to 9, just down to 1 a month. And what it does is it requires 2 tornado drills, 1 in September after school gets started, and then 1 in April. But there was some discussion at the committee hearing Monday that we'll probably move that April drill to March, just because of the change of seasons that we're experiencing. And then there'll be 4 fire drills and 3 crisis drills. So instead of 9 crisis drills, we're down to 3, and the crisis and fire will alternate each month. And then it's pretty much going to be up to the schools on what they decide they want those crisis drills to look like. I know they're getting some good advice and support from the new Secure and Safe School Group. I think they'll be able to work that out, but it was just something that was a surprise to everybody when it happened. But I think this bill, will fix that going forward. And when we had the hearing Monday, I don't remember any opposition to it in those numbers. Again, the only, I think, change they might do is move the 1 tornado drill from April to March. And then it was requested by one of the committee members to address the classrooms where they have students with special needs, and how the fire alarm and those type of drills sort of upset their day and their routine. So I think you'll see language in the bill that will allow those districts, those principals, to actually submit a variance request to our office on a case-by-case basis with those individual classrooms that they might have, and that we'll be able to work with them. Possibly like on a fire drill, they'll be able to let the teacher know 30 minutes ahead of time, and she'll maybe be able to move those students out of the building for a short field trip or something, so they're not actually in the building when the alarm goes off. So I think there's a lot of things we can do along those lines to help with those particular types of classrooms. The other variance we issued a while back is, was out on the news media of intruders using the fire alarm to further their cause in different schools. And that's actually the one case where that was, I guess, advertised to have happened. The fire alarm actually went off because of the number of firearm rounds that were discharged inside the building. The intruder actually didn't do it. But again, to help the school administrators, the teachers, and especially the students on that issue, we are now allowing the school administrators to announce over the PA system 5 minutes in advance that whatever type of drill they're doing is coming up. And so everybody in the building will know that it is a drill, and they'll know what type of drill it is. So it won't be a surprise to them anymore. Senate Bill 109, that's the appropriations bill that passed. And again, we're working on that with new bill, Senate Bill 128. And I think we will get that down to just 9 drills throughout the year, 1 drill a month. Again, just some reference for the board, different issues that might come up for your schools. Very seldom do we get to the point where we have to issue a cease and desist order. Definitely not with schools. I mean, we're the last few years, I don't know of any issue we haven't been able to work out with schools. We get to the cease and desist order sometimes on the commercial side with different businesses that just continue not to fix things or make their individual buildings or businesses safe. And there are some times where I have issued a cease and desist order, and we've closed that facility for a few days, and then they've come around and taken care of what needed to be taken care of. But again, I've never experienced that with any schools in the state. Again, the fire department's conducting inspections for our office. We're experiencing, because of budget cuts at the local level, a lot of the fire departments that we have agreements with are giving those inspections back to us. We had over 400 given back to us at the beginning of 2018. And currently for 2019, we have over 700 inspections coming back to our office. And on top of some Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services inspections we do, and some other state agencies that require an inspection by our office for licensing issues, we have about 1,000 inspections that we're having to add to our schedule for this next year. So we're pretty much overwhelmed right now. But we contend and we hope to continue with our schedule to get all the schools done annually. That's a priority for us. And when you send in a plan review, we do let everybody know that, we'll respond within 30 days. Right now, we're over that a little bit, but again, the schools are going to get our priority. The state and public buildings will get our priority over the commercial buildings going forward. We recently went to the legislature trying to update the fire and life safety codes for the state. I met with some very strong opposition from some of the unions and other different groups in the state. And one of the recommendations from the Joint Committee on Rules and Regs was to form an advisory group. So we formed an advisory group, and we have over 25 individuals on that group now. Mr. Porter from your board is on the group. So as we're moving forward in the process of updating our rules and regulations and adopting new codes, we're getting input from everybody that's involved. And when there's a specific part of the code that just deals with schools, we'll be sharing that with Mr. Porter, and then he's able to share that with the superintendents, the principals, the other members of the board, and then we get some input from the people that those new rules and regs are going to affect. And we hope that we'll be able to present a better package to the committee next time, that we have, as best we can, everybody sort of in agreement with the package that we're putting forward. That's just a breakdown of our current inspection and prevention division. We have 13 field inspectors, and that's currently the breakup of the areas. All of our inspectors live and work out of their home and assigned to different areas in the state. The inspection process. When the inspection process starts, we do those usually September 1 through April 30th. We stay away from August because, those first few weeks of school are really busy and hectic. So we try and stay out of the administrator and the custodial staff's way for a few weeks. And then we try and get them done before May, before the end of school, when they have the same thing, when they have field trips and different things going on. If we receive a complaint from any individual, we'll respond to that complaint within 24 hours. Even if we had done an inspection a week before and somebody calls and has a complaint about a particular building, we will still go out and look into that complaint. When we get there, we sit down with, whether it's the principal, whether it's the head custodian, it's whoever the school administration sort of sends with our inspectors, and we actually have them accompany our inspectors through the whole building and through the whole process. We don't send our inspectors through a building without being escorted, because as we go through the building and as they find issues or concerns, they're able to point those out to the individual that's with them right away, and they actually see, and we feel they understand it a little bit more, rather than getting a report a couple days later and reading about it and trying to figure out what they're actually talking about. When it comes to ideas and suggestions, we can't give a lot of ideas and suggestions out. The school are forced to go to an engineer or an architect. We'll try and help a little bit, but There's actually state law that prohibits us from giving advice because our inspectors are not trained or certified architects or engineers. And we can't be giving out that type of advice. If it's something minor, we do our best to give ideas on suggestions, maybe on the type of locks that would be more appropriate or whatever the case might be. But when it comes to actual construction things and electrical issues, things like that, we sort of have to bow out on those. If the school has any before and after childcare programs, if they have a pre-K or Head Start program on site, those will be included in our inspections too. Basically, the only thing we don't do are the bus barns. We will do the shops. If they have woodworking or mechanical shops, we do those areas also. If we issue any violations, our staff will explain it again to whoever's there from the school and answer any questions they have, and also help them on what the process is going to be going forward to take that. And that comes up in the end of the inspection. Our staff sits down with whoever at the school, they go through everything, they explain everything, they answer any questions, and then we give the schools 10 calendar days to respond back with plans of corrections. And again, if it's a major thing, all they have to do is notify us that they need more time, and we'll give them more time. And once that plan of corrections approved, again, we'll give them leeway depending on the cost, depending on what's involved mechanical or construction wise. We realize some of those things can't be done, so we can put some other measures in place, and that allows them a little bit more time to fix whatever the violation might be. On the plan reviews, again, if you're doing new construction or more than a 50% remodel, those plan reviews have to be done and have to be submitted. We will come out sort of midway through that project and do an inspection just to see how things are going, to make sure things are being done properly. Our inspector will work with the contractor because like if it's a new building and a sprinkler system's going in, we want to see that sprinkler system before it gets covered with sheetrock. So that's why we come out around the 50% range and do that. And then we do a final inspection before the building can be occupied. And that's really, I think, about what I have for you today. Again, I do want to emphasize, I think the cooperation that's there between our office and the State Board of Education and also the State Department of Education going forward, not only on the drills and on the inspections, but on overall school safety. A year or so ago, we issued some variances, and it's on our website. I know a lot of the schools are aware, but we're actually allowing some intruder lockdown devices that are actually outside our current code. But again, just more of a common sense approach. We issued a variance, and we're allowing about a half dozen different devices that the schools can use for extra lockdown procedures on some of their doors. And with that, I'll answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure the board was interested, and a number of us have heard about the 9 crisis drills were added last year, so I'm sure school districts will be happy to hear, and hopefully that will pass, that will be modified. Seems like a pretty reasonable approach, quite frankly, so we appreciate hearing about that. We do have some questions. Jim McNeese.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. As I mentioned before, I was a high school principal for many years, and I'm still learning stuff about school safety. And by the way, thank you for a common sense approach. I remember the days when we didn't have the common sense approach. But also, Randy, this question for you, and I don't know this, maybe others do, but where do we teach, or where do we provide information for teachers and for administrators, those going into education, for safety, I don't know, instruction. And safety is such a huge word today. It's not just about drills, it's so much more, but school safety. Where do we have standards for school safety that we are asking? And I'm not talking about, I know we all have crisis plans, but the standards for preparation and teacher preparation and administrator preparation.
Administrator preparation, yes.
Because I haven't been in the classroom in a long time. And
and those would have come after you and I, and there's facilities and on teaching, I'll have to check. I don't know. I'm going to look over. Craig may not know that either. I don't know on the teaching side whether there's anything that
Well, it
talks
reminded
about
me-
school safety, but I can
We
check
do
on
some
that.
things with new teachers, and coming into the building, like, no extension cords, please. Just not, don't go there. And like this time of year, candles and, and then space heaters and, things like that. and then the frustration people have in the buildings with the drills. You can take them down to one and somebody's going to complain that we didn't have enough, we don't have too many. But, I'm just wondering about, preparation. I know that, from my experience in USD 259 especially, we did a lot of work on safety, a lot of work, on all the levels of safety, and we used to have way more drills than you even provide, were expected. I can think of anthrax drills we used to have, but I'm just wondering what we're doing for our professionals that are coming out and, for those that are going to be in leadership positions, and so on. So, yeah, thank you.
And I can speak to that just
Oh,
a
great,
little
thank
bit. I'd mentioned the advisory group that's now in place with the State Department of Education. And they actually hired 2 individuals. They're now their Safe and Secured School group. And they're working with the individual schools. We recently, between their help and the advisory group, we actually put a template out. And I think it's available on the website. That gives all the school superintendents and principals a roadmap, more or less, on what they need to look at in their individual buildings, whether it's fire, whether it's intruder, tornado, or anything else. It actually somewhat gives them a checklist. So they can walk through their building and they can see how their building compares to what's in that checklist and give them some ideas on some things they need to address. But there's also training available for the teachers for in-service. I know the 2 staff members with Safe and Prepared Schools have been out speaking to teacher groups, the superintendents and the principals association. So I think you'll see a lot more of that coming forward in the very near future that'll help the administrators, the teachers, try and get a little bit better handle on what those drills entail. And if there are those particular types of events, what they can do or what they need to do to, be a little bit more prepared.
Thank you.
Steve?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Doug, for being here. I used to be an environmental engineer, certified hazardous materials manager, one of the many things I've done. I'm looking at NFPA standards, and it looks like they're putting together hazardous materials and weapons of mass destruction incidents training, like taking a similar approach. My question was going to be about hazmat, if we have any hazmat issues. But as I'm looking at the NFPA standards, are we, in addition to that question, do we have any hazmat issues in our schools? Are we seeing an approach to dealing with weapons of mass destruction in a similar way as we deal with hazmat and emergency response?
I would answer yes to both of those. Currently, our office is also responsible for the state hazmat response program and the state search and rescue program. On the hazmat side, we have contracts with about a dozen fire departments around the state. We supply training and equipment, and they do the state hazmat responses for us as part of that contract. So there is a hazmat team located regionally in all parts of the state. We have responded to school situations, most of those being in a chemistry lab when something was spilled or something was leaking, or they found an old bottle in the shelf in the closet that had all kinds of granular substance outside of it or on it. So, and those things are addressed in this overall plan that I was speaking about. Hazmat situations, again, building collapse, things like that. They're all in there. And I think currently, at least from our office, we're well prepared, I think, in a place to respond to those. And we do not, when we respond to a commercial hazmat incident, we do attempt to recoup our costs from the individual or from the insurance company, but we don't do that for the schools or public buildings. We use funds in our budget and we pay for those responses ourselves. But they are available and they are, again, something that's on our list and that we're very much aware of, and have the ability, if a particular school wants to address that or have a presentation on that hazmat side, I have the staff that can come out and do that for them.
Jim Porter.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, just a couple of comments that that are positive. First of all, when I used to work for a living, I was a school superintendent, and I had in my district a 1920-something building. So I think those things that you waived, I think I had most of them.
Probably did.
And that was, that much more realistic, and we appreciate that attitude. Also, one of the most frustrating things I had when we started working with building security and securing buildings was the fact that things that we could use to secure interior doors in other states we couldn't do in Kansas, and it sounds like you've addressed that. And I just want to thank you for doing that, because that's a major issue, and we can't send people out in the hall to lock a door if there's an active shooter in the building. And so those were two major concerns I had, and it appears that you've addressed both of them. Thank you.
We haven't, and going forward in the future, we've reached out to the state architect and engineers associations, and we've given them some ideas on some things they need to be aware of when they're designing new buildings. Where it comes to the locking mechanism on the classroom doors, we suggested that if they're going to have classroom doors with the view window, they move the view window over to the hinge side, because one of the issues that has come to us from some of the schools in the state are, well, all they can do is they can break out that window and reach in and unlock a door mechanism that meets code. So in order that we can continue to try and stay within code and have the schools use the single motion type of devices, we've asked them to move the window and the doors over to the hinge side. And then if that's not the case, then again, we've got about a dozen different devices that can be used at the top of the door or at the floor level of the door, where if somebody would break the window, there's no way they can reach in and access those.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. And looks like we'll be getting updates from Mr. Porter after you guys have advisory meetings. So if there's anything we need to hear further, I'm sure he'll update us, and then our own department folks too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your report. Okay, the next item is going to be board member travel. So do we have any changes or additions to board member? Ben?
Yeah, I will be visiting on February 18th. I will be visiting Burton. No salaries, take the salary off of it. Just mileage only. And then salary only one day for KMEA, meeting with their board of directors on that Thursday. But the rest of it was that. And then I also need to add a KFAC education committee meeting in Manhattan on March 5th. I already said in Manhattan. And then the K-TOY presentation at Geary County Schools on March 6th. And salary on the 5th and just salary and mileage on the 5th and just mileage on the 6th.
Sorry, on the 6th, where was that at?
Junction City.
Others? Steve?
I think you have me down for travel for the economic development. It's a meeting I cannot attend. My wife's getting a new shoulder, at the Mayo Clinic next week. So you just take off my travel on February 20th. Thank you.
Ben?
There's also a correction. I think I corrected it with Peggy, but just to let you know, my Kansas Day activity was actually with the Kansas Foundation for Agriculture in the Classroom, not the First Alliance.
Okay, I have a change too, Peggy. I will not be able to be up here on the 21st for that recognition, but I am planning on going to the Kansas Can and Do Symposium. Yeah, at this point, yes. And anything else on travel?
I'm going on 22nd and 23rd to Seattle.
You don't want any mileage on that, Jim?
Jim, did you contact the appropriate people? Because we just were the in-between on that. Okay, it's in the email that I sent to you and Kathy. Do you still have that? You need me to resend it to you? Okay.
Anything else on travel? If not, I'd take a motion to approve travel. Dina, second? Ann, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, looks like a 10-0 to me. Okay, looks like that's it for the good of the order. Just one more reminder about the Jim Porter and the room. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, I think it's 112 North. Yep, and it'll be at 1:30. So thanks to all of our guests for today, and appreciate the conversations. A lot of good topics today. So we are adjourned. Oh.